Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. Welcome, everybody. Today on Big Blend Radio, we get to have a wonderful author, Francine Falk-Allen, join us to talk about her historical fiction novel, A Wolff in the Family. You can go to her website, Francine Falk, Falk-Allen.com. The link is in the episode notes. She is a memoirist. She's got 2 memoirs out, but her novel comes out October 1st, and this does deal with family history. Don't we all love that? We do. I know. I do. And we're excited that it's out. And, you know, this is one of these interviews that are going to be on multiple channels here on Big Blend Radio. So probably our Way Back When history show, our Women Making History show, because, hey, she's spilling the goods. And so stay tuned for that. And again, links are in the episode notes, how to get it. I always say pre-order if you can, so you can get it. And it always helps authors when you pre-order. So welcome, Francine. How are you?
I'm just fine. Thank you very much, Lisa.
So you dug up some dirt on your family, right? And then said, okay, I'm going to make it fiction instead of a memoir this time. What was your decision like on this? Because you've got 2 memoirs, right? But most of it is about your personal life, right? The other 2.
Well, the first one was definitely memoir. The second one was memoir slash self-help. And this one was information that I discovered when I went to a memorial service, and an aunt of mine just suddenly blurted out some things about family history that my mother had never told me before she died. And it was juicy stuff. And I thought, when I finish all the rest of these books, I am going to tackle this one and make up a story about it. It's my grandmother is the key character, and I never knew her. She died when I was 2, and I didn't ever remember meeting her. So I had to just make up her personality, but I sort of based it on what my aunts and my mother were like. And also, I give a lot of thought to what would have motivated her to make some of the choices she did. And as a woman, knowing what it would be like to be left home alone if your husband was gone all the time, because my grandfather was a railroad man. So there was a lot of grist for the mill there.
Yeah, you know, and so everyone, I want people to know the book again, A Wolff in the Family, and that's 2 F's for the Wolff. So, you know, you think about, you've got Frank and Naomi, right? Wolff, and she's a farm lady and he's a railroad engineer, but they ended up with a massive family. Was that true in your own family? Like that, I mean, did you stretch the family on the railroad tracks, or what was going on there? That's a lot of kids.
It was based on the reality. As much as I could, I based it on fact. And there were 12 children, and then there were more. And yeah, my mother was the eldest of these kids, and she told me a few vignettes about her childhood, mostly from her point of view, and kept a lot of the really scandalous stuff secret. It was just mind-blowing to find out that all these things had happened. And yes, there are a lot of characters. So in the beginning of the book, I have a list of characters to help people out if they get lost. I mean, I tried to make it pretty clear as I wrote, but eventually I thought, yeah, it's a lot of people to keep track of. So yeah.
But that's real. I mean, and so when you do genealogy and we talk about family trees, you need that family tree, right? So, I mean, when you think about the persona that you were writing these characters, getting your grandmother's character together, were you doing that through genealogy and family history and starting to find, oh, maybe she cooked over here or she did this over here, and start to develop her character from what you've discovered about her?
Well, partly yes. Yeah, partly yes. I did use census records to discover where everyone was, where they had been born, how long they lived in different places, what people's professions were, my aunts and uncles, but also the older characters, so that I knew where to place them. And I also knew that they had limited education, so that helped me to create the conversations, because I knew that they weren't going to have, you know, sophisticated college education kinds of conversations. So yeah, those things definitely helped. And I had done a certain amount of genealogy work maybe 20 years ago. Mostly I concentrated on my father's family because my mother's family had been done by her relatives for the most part. But I didn't, I mean, in some place in an album, I have all that information, but I actually used archives and, you know, different genealogy sites and, as I said, census records and all of that sort of thing to bring forth what they could have been like because of where they were and what they did. And also, I did know how my aunts and uncles spoke. So I used that as information to inform how I had my grandparents and my grandparents, because they appear in the book, how I would have them speak, knowing what I did about my aunts and uncles. And there's more.
Yeah. But I think, and what was it like going from memoir to fiction? Basically, you just wanted to, you couldn't really write it as like I mean, exactly how it was, right? Because it's hard when you're piecing everyone's lives together. So is that what kind of inspired you to do this as fiction instead of memoir?
I did it as fiction because partly because I didn't want to get sued if I, you know, if
Yeah,
I said, well, they did this and they did that, and my cousins went, wait a minute, that's not my uncle. I mean, that's not my dad, you know, that type of thing. I mean, I'm kidding, but you know, I did want to
yeah,
protect myself. And because in memoir you do need to learn to write scenes and conversation because it's much more interesting when you bring in other people and don't just say, I did this, I think that, you know, making it I. And
yeah.
so I had some practice in that. The difference for me was, well, first of all, I needed to do a chronological outline. So I did that, and that was really helpful for the structure. And I used census records and everything to figure out when things could have possibly happened. But my editor pointed out that I was what they call head hopping. So I would have a scene wherein my grandmother would start the scene with her conversation and thoughts or whatever, and then I would jump over to what I imagined my grandfather would have been thinking. She said, "You can't do that. You can't do that. You have to have each section has to have the point of view of one character." And at first, I felt really constrained by that. I thought, well, how am I going to show what his reaction is and stuff? Well, I had to learn to separate it out and make it so
Wow.
that each character had the dominance of a scene. And if I wanted to show what someone else was thinking or feeling, I could show it by a gesture or a look on their face or a comment that they made or having them walk out of the room to show they were angry.
Mm.
So I learned to do that, and it was really a transition for me. It was hard at first, and I felt like this isn't fair. People do this all the time. They show what somebody else is thinking, but not in really good novels.
Well,
So that
I
was
think
something I
also
had
kind
to
of
learn.
the original way you were writing is almost more for TV, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah.
Do you feel that like when I just did a podcast about uh history in LA of different people's lives, and I was talking to the documentary filmmaker and I said, "Don't you feel like this should be like a series?" Because once you start getting into people's history, and then you see the ripple effect of their history, right? It's not, it doesn't just mean it's staying within the family. It's like they knew that grocer and they
Mhm,
talk to that grocer every day. Now
mhm.
we want to know the grocer. So, like, do you feel like this could be something that is like a series?
Well, I definitely can see it as a movie.
Yeah.
Every author wishes their book could be picked up like that, but several people have said, "Wow, this is like a movie. This is like cinematic. It's you can see what's going on with the
Mm,
characters." And I
mm.
saw it when as I was writing. I mean, I watch a lot of movies, and I could see it. I could see it. So I don't know. You know, it would be great. You know, it'd be great if it were.
But they always say the book is better than the movie too. So it's like great, it gets out there, but then you want everyone to say, "Yeah, the book is better than the movie." So I want to give everyone some context here because we're talking about family history, and that this is a story of two people going out in Kansas, right? And he's out doing a railroad work. His wife is birthing a lot of babies. give everybody a little bit of just a little teaser of what the story tells, but don't give the secret away. That's
Okay.
important.
Okay, so first of all, they did move to Ogden, Utah, because that was a railroad center. And so going
Yes.
from living in Kansas, they had, an outhouse, and they didn't have indoor plumbing and that sort of thing. And then they moved to Ogden, and it wasn't like my grandmother and the children had it easy, but this was around 1918 when they moved there. And I have it that she really appreciated having indoor plumbing and, having a wringer washer instead of a washboard and that sort of thing. So the gist of the story is the first, maybe third or so, you're getting to know the characters, and it's very domestic. And they travel back and forth to visit relatives in Kansas and Missouri on the train
Mm.
because the whole family had free tickets anywhere in the United States, anytime they wanted to go. But of course, taking a vacation at that time meant going to see your relatives. It wasn't like they went to New York City and all dressed up and went out to see shows or something. Not at all. So there's one train trip that I describe in detail in order to create the atmosphere of what it was like to take the train and how far things really were. And they didn't have a car at that point, and most people didn't. So as the story goes on, she's having more and more children. There's more and more stress because my grandfather is gone most of the time on the railroad. There's a hint that he might be fooling around. She
Mm.
doesn't like that. Just a hint. And there comes a point when things fall apart in the relationship, and my grandfather gets angry and puts some of the children in an orphanage, gives them away to an orphanage. And that was the point that I learned at this memorial service. And my
It's
aunt just
amazing.
said,
It's like
"I'll get
amazing in in like jaw dropping, right?
what's
Jaw
that?"
dropping. It's amazing, like jaw dropping, not happy amazing. That's like what, you know, and but
Yeah,
they that
exactly.
stuff happened.
Exactly. It was insane, to have my Aunt Dorothy. I'm just having lunch with her, and she says, "Well, when we were in the orphanage," I said, "What? Wait a minute." I asked my cousin sitting next to me, "Did you know about this story?" She said, "No." I asked my aunt down the table, he's aunt by marriage. She said, "Well, I'd heard a little about it, and so I pumped her for more information to find out why he did this, which was it sort of appears that it could have been financial because this was around 1930, but there was way more to it than that. And that's the part I can't give away because it's a big, big plot point. There are a number of big plot points. And
But I think this is a
changed the
reality for
family, that's
many.
for sure.
This is a reality for many. I mean, I even look at our family, and my mom's dad had three wives at the same time, and they weren't Mormon or in Utah. You know, he named all the kids the same names. And she just found out because she got a like an inheritance check from her aunt, and it passed. And then she finds like there's three Nancys, like,
Amazing.
and
Amazing.
that was that generation. It was they're a little bit, yeah, yeah. It's insane, like
Well, that's a
really.
good story right there. If you ever
Oh
want
my
to
gosh,
write.
if you dig into our family history, go for it. And we're doing our genealogy now. We have a friend doing it, Aaron Youngless, who's doing it. And we're trying to piece from my mom's memory of certain conversations to like actual houses and everything. And the more we find, the more we want to go and hide our heads under the blankets and go, that's in our family. We don't want to know. So,
Speaking of houses, one of the things I did was research where they actually live because in the
okay. Yeah.
census
Yeah.
records it shows the addresses. So some of the houses weren't existing anymore, but some other houses that were similar in the same neighborhood still did exist. So I had someone do illustrations of the different places that they would have lived, and I found a photo of the orphanage, which has since been torn down, but
Ooh,
that's in there. There's an illustration of the actual orphanage. And one of the big surprises was I found a photo of the house where my grandfather lived when he was not at home, the boarding house where he lived. And that was because I researched the name of the woman that ran the boarding house, because I happen to know that because that was one of the things my aunt had told me. So I found interior pictures of it. So I was able to even talk about the house having two staircases, and one was kind of secret and the other one was, polished, and everything is much nicer than the shack that my grandparents actually lived in. So there were a lot of things like that that drove the story when I found photographs of places they used to live, or similar places.
Wow. And you think about trains at that time. So like Ogden, Utah, isn't that where the Golden Spike happened? Like
I
the
think so. Yeah, I think
near
so.
there.
Yeah, I think
Um,
actually there's a celebration of that like this month or next month or something.
yeah.
I'm talking to my publicist about, using that information. So
Well, yeah, because the train history is insane. Railroad people love their rail history, and I love it too. And I mean, I remember I was a musician at professional musician at one point and did a performance on a train, an old caboose. And I couldn't believe all the people that came out in the middle of the nowhere, out of nowhere, for this one caboose. It wasn't for me. It was the caboose. And I just
yeah.
had to
Mhm.
sit and play. And I was like, what? No, because the train history, I mean, it changed America at
It
that time.
did. It
It
opened
changed
everything up.
everything. It changed. I mean, Tombstone, Arizona, I always talk about this. Tombstone, Arizona was a gold mine or mining town. It went silver. I think it was silver. And they were tents. It was tent city, and it actually moved locations a few times. It was tent city, but they were getting oysters, and the rich people would go in these tents, and that were restaurants at the time, and they would be able to get fresh oysters from San Francisco because of the railroads.
Of the railroad, right. It
And
really made it so that people could move, and that was
yes,
unusual. And there actually was, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, a lot of orphans were moved by train, from New York
oh
and Chicago and bigger cities, because they were on the streets begging, and all these, children's aid societies took it upon themselves to move these kids, sometimes without the parents' consent, and sometimes because the
wow,
parents knew they couldn't support them, and they would get sent out to farms where people wanted more workers. They wanted more children in their family because they were working the farms, and some of the children had really good situations, and some of them it was really abysmal, but the trains made that possible too. So I
yeah,
wrote a couple of
good and
books.
bad, good and bad, good and bad
Yes,
on that, right?
yes,
But this is when we talk about the orphanages too. I've got myself in rabbit holes on that in history, and um convents became a lot of places for orphans. And I don't even want to start going there because also a lot of them died in these convents and were worked, like the Magdalena sisters in Ireland. They I don't know if you've seen about that, but
yes, I
the
have.
the washing, it's horrible.
Yeah,
But
it is.
like you think about these orphanages at the time, and him saying, okay, these kids get to go to the orphanage. How hard is it to trace their family history at that point? What was
Well,
allowed out there for your family to still be united?
that's one of the plot points about what
Okay,
happened
I'm
in
sorry.
New.
Oopsie.
That's okay.
I
It's
knew I
okay.
was going to get in trouble with you.
But I can tell you, I wish I could say more, but I don't want to give it away
We'll have
because
to do a book. We'll have to do like a book talk or something once it's out and everyone's read it. We'll have to
yeah,
have like a
yeah, for
I
a
don't know.
book
Maybe we'll have
club,
to do a
that'd be
Big
more
Glen
fun.
Radio book club. Ooh, maybe
Let
we
me let me
will
tell
at
you
some point.
something though.
Yeah,
So I did find information on the orphanage, and I contacted the town where it existed, and someone from the historical society sent me information. And it was a better situation than most orphanages were. And these people that ran it were very kind, a little strange. They made all the kids, called them Mama and Papa. And so I have a scene about that, that the kids that are in the orphanage are thinking, yeah, well, this is weird, but they insist on it. And they really did try to put the children in good homes, and they tried not to separate families. And if they
that's nice.
did, there were 5 kids from my family that were there. And so the policy would have been that if one or two children went to a particular town, They wouldn't let the rest of them go unless somebody adopted them in the same town, because they were trying to keep families together as much as they could. And also children who had been in that orphanage often, and you know, a lot of them, it was because of the depression. Their families couldn't afford to keep them. And some of them, the families would come and visit them. And the kids that you could say graduated from there, some of them ended up going to college. Most of them came back and volunteered at the orphanage and had a good relationship
Wow.
with the people who ran it. So I was prepared to find a lot of horrible information.
Like the
And I
Magdalena
was,
sisters. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I was glad to find that they were actually treated kindly. Although for the children, I'm sure it was heartbreaking. They were 1,200 miles away from their home and away from any of their family and friends. 1,200 miles. And they were kids. They weren't going to just jump on a train and go somewhere. Although one of them was left out because he was too old. And he was a leaf on the wind for a while until a few years later he ended up being back with some of the family. But yeah, that was that, and it did not serve him well. He turned out to be not the nicest of my uncles, you know,
Yeah.
having
That,
been abandoned like that.
yeah. No, no, no. I mean, and what about, in regards to girls being shipped off like that? I always worry about that. They could end up in a household that they're abused too, as
Yeah,
women.
well, sometimes, well, usually in the case of this orphanage, that was not likely to happen,
That's
but
good.
it was true that most people were looking for the youngest child they could get if they wanted someone as their own child. So my Aunt Dorothy was on, you know, in the process of being adopted at one point. I'll just leave it at that. But older girls like my Aunt Marie, who was 13 and 14 when she was there, they allowed her to stay because frequently people wanted a maid or a housekeeper or a seamstress or somebody to help them around the house. So an older girl was often taken, you know, and they were treated as a family member slash servant in this case.
So genealogy, you love and hate it, don't you, at times doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most disappointing thing I ever found out was that on my dad's side, there were Southerners. Some of them were Southerners, and one of my I think my three times great grandmother was a slave owner or slave holder, I should call it.
Oof.
But I did find out, and I cried when I learned that. It
Yeah.
just me. But I did find out later that that she was protective of them for a number of reasons. There were some other stories that I found out that led me to believe that she was protective of them. And after the Civil War, she helped them buy property. She helped
Oh,
them own
wow.
homes so they'd have a deed to their own property. This was on the northern side because my relatives mostly were from the Northeast, but they had some
Mm.
of them had moved to Texas temporarily and got involved in the Civil War. But anyway, so that was a tough piece of information. And I have been to the Slave Museum in Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm telling
Oh,
you,
yeah.
gut wrenching for me. I cried
Oh,
again. You know, it was just like I hated knowing that I had ancestors that were involved in this. You know,
it's weird
and
because you get so excited about finding about ancestors, like, ooh, I don't like tomatoes, they don't like tomato, and you feel a kin. Just stupid little things like that.
mm,
And then all of a sudden, like our side, we've got like Nazis, and it's hard for us. We're going through that. It's very difficult to swallow because
it
I mean,
is.
especially the way we're going in this world right now. And
Yeah.
so we're very like, this is this is not it, and you have to go like dig deeper. And I think what's good about historical fiction and what you've done too is you dig deeper into a story. So it's not all orphanages are bad, and it's not the perfect situation, but let's look at it on both sides. And that's what I think was is so great about what you've done is even talking about your family and the slavery side of it. It's like, wait, it's not all, if you just say slavery, that's it. Everybody freaks out. It's bad, right? We all know that. Yes. But who knows if she just that's the way life was and she had to kind of keep up with that to keep
Yeah,
her
that
own
was
survival, and through
in
that was keeping everybody else alive. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So we
and
don't look at all of that, and that's what I like what you're doing is you're giving everybody there's more than one side of a story.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And I tried to do that in A Wolf in the Family. In fact, I knew my grandfather, and I knew him to be rather vindictive. And
Mm,
he and my mother were very close, and it always confused me because I didn't think he was that nice a person. But I came to realize that she had a lot of personality traits that were the same as his, and she loved him very much. So um, I was talking to a meditation guide that I work with sometimes, and I said, I'm really having trouble uh, creating my grandfather's personality for my novel because I just saw this one side at him, side of him, and I'm like angry with him for his actions now that I know
sure.
some of the things he did. And she said, well, a good practice is when you have a person like that you're trying to be more compassionate with, to say things like, my grandfather had feelings just like me. My grandfather loved his relatives just like me. My grandfather had priorities in his life just like me. And that helped. I mean, I started thinking, okay, what were my
Yeah.
grandfather's motivations and why did he do some of the things he did? And he must have thought it was the best thing to do. I think he sort of backed himself into a corner in some respects, given the things that happened in the story. And he made choices that were not the
Mm-mm.
smartest ones and later had to deal with them. So,
Well, I think at the end of the day, we're only human, right?
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
We're human. I love this. I love this because I think in historical fiction too, I love memoir. I love both. Historical fiction is what got me through history as well as going to historic sites. But historical fiction is gossip. I mean, that's really what it is, right?
Yeah.
And history is that. But when people read a story, there's no such thing as true historical fiction. It's all based on truth somewhere, right? Don't you
Yeah.
think?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
your book is. I don't care if it's a historical movie. Everything is based on truth somewhere in this historical fiction narrative, whether it's a movie or a book, a screenplay, a play, I don't care. It is based on truth. And the arts have always been based on truth, telling the stories, whereas sometimes the news isn't always there. And you know that even doing genealogy, it's like, okay, they're sensationalizing this here, in the newspaper to sell the newspaper, but you know what I mean? But I think historical fiction and memoir, it's just the power of books. It's a personal experience, and you can identify with characters within that, and maybe start to come to terms, like you're saying. You're angry. My grandfather is a beast. I don't ever want to know him, but I have to reconcile with his beast, like him as a beast. He was mean.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
I
exactly like you're saying. So a fictional thing allows me to escape a little bit because we still like the villains.
Right. So, so I also knew that some of my aunts and uncles really sided with my grandfather, and they're good
Hmm.
people,
Yep.
and some of them really sided with my grandmother. So that helped
Oof.
me too, because I knew that some of it was there were moral dilemmas and ethical dilemmas, and they kind of stood on one side or the other of them. And they still all stayed in touch. It was still their family.
It's
They were still
weird.
brothers and sisters. They still did, and uh, and they would get together sometimes. And I just thought it it took some kind of, I want to say, big love to do that. You
Yeah,
know,
that's why I said weird. And I don't mean weird, but like weird, but it's bigger than the situation.
it's a little hard to explain in some respects. And I know that my mother eventually moved to Los Angeles when she was first married, and my mother was married 4 times. My dad was her third, no, second husband.
Oh,
But
okay.
but when she moved to Los Angeles, it was like her brothers and sisters came down there and lived with her, almost every one of them, one at a time or two at a time, and
Mm,
stayed there until they got themselves established. And part of the reason that she moved out of the house when she was rather young in the first place in Ogden was because she was really tired of being the oldest girl and taking care of all these kids and doing the housework. She was like a second mom. And so when she moved away, she thought, I'm done with that. But then they came and stayed with her one at a time. And my sister was there at the time. My sister was a
That's
lot older
funny.
than me. And she said mother really resented it, that she had taken care of them all of her life in Ogden, and then they come to Los Angeles and she's taken care of them again as adults. So I thought that was just kind of funny,
Yeah,
so,
it's
but she
family.
didn't turn
It's
him away.
interesting.
She didn't say, no, you can't stay here. And she probably just resented it, knowing my mother. She probably just, she said yes. And I remember asking her about something she did one time it was a repeated thing that she kept doing, and she resented it, was doing it for someone else. And I said, why do you keep doing that? Why don't you just say no? And she said, well, I don't want to be stinko. And I thought, well, everybody knows you're stinko already.
Oh, it's a family
So,
thing,
I
man.
didn't say that, but
Yeah, but it's I don't know. It is there's it things, I look at mushrooms, right? And how mushrooms grow in the forest, and you've got the fruit on top and this network going underneath that
mhm,
connects with the trees. That is so powerful, and it's ancient. It's older than dinosaurs, right? So I
mhm,
think that's kind of interesting about family trees, because we do this DNA thing happens. We look up our DNA just even for our own health research. Like, did somebody have diabetes?
yeah,
Did somebody have
mhm,
cancer? Right.
mhm,
And then we start finding all these cool things. And then, like I said, then we find that, oh, oopsie, they're not perfect. I want the perfect tree.
right.
That's not how it works. You
That
get an
isn't how
apple
it works.
tree, you get good apples, and you get ones that get picked out by birds, and you get ones that just came out. So that's just the
Well,
reality
I
of it.
also I also know some of the good things I got from my mother. She and I had a difficult relationship, and she didn't approve of me in a lot of ways, but for different reasons. But she loved to sing, and I do too. I don't as much as I used to, but I used to sing with groups and record and all that.
Mm,
And she also really made a big point of being fair and sharing with other kids. Maybe partly because I was the last one home. I was home alone for
mm,
a lot of my life, and so I know that that partly came from her background, from having a big family, and they had to share. There wasn't enough to go around sometimes, and you didn't eat in front of people if they didn't have anything to eat. So there were good things that I learned from her, even though we had a difficult relationship,
mm.
and we were affectionate. We were affectionate, and it was clear that we loved each other. It just was like, I was sort of like born to a person that I had nothing in common with, and I think she felt the same about me. Like, where did this kid come from?
That's wild, isn't it? Yeah. It's wild. And it's like, yeah, you either connect or you don't. I mean, we all have that in our family. It's like, okay, I can really get on with this uncle, but the other one, heck no. He just looks at me in disapproval. Like, that's the look I get. I'm like, what?
Mhm. Yeah.
I didn't do anything. What? Why? What did I do? I didn't rob a bank. I didn't do anything. What? But there's this disapproval,
Hmm.
and then the other ones are like, let's go have fun. Like, you're my little niece. It's weird because I grew up outside of my family, and then came to the States and met my family. And then
Hmm.
I went, oh, hell no,
Well,
because
I
it's
have,
crazy.
my cousins are really varied, but they are mostly more religious than I am, and I
Mm,
have more of a spiritual attitude, and they have a definite religious attitude. But we just know where to stop,
yeah,
not
that's
to talk
nice.
about. And I have had some frank conversations with one of my cousins who is very religious, but she respects my point of view. The rest of them, I think it'd be like they think I'm crazy because I'm not like them. And then I have some of the cousins on my dad's side thinks just like I do, and somehow managed to not be in that milieu that they're in. But we're respectful of each other, and
That's
it
nice. That's lovely.
would be very difficult to do that if we were talking about politics, I know, but um you know it's it's at least we have some kind of affection for each other. That it's like, yeah, blood's thicker than water sometimes.
It is interesting, and at the end of the day, let's just all find our commonality, find our common ground and build on that. It's just interesting how humans are, and that's the beauty of historical fiction. You're going to find your own family within the story, right? You're going to,
Yes, and I think that people will, in reading it, they're going to have a lot of thoughts about, wow, I wonder what happened in my family. And I put a reader's guide in the back so that book clubs and people who want to get together and discuss some of the topics in the book can have some places to jump off from. And I think that there's some really good questions about women's roles and about
mm,
how travel has changed and what that does to a family. Like
yep,
now, I mean, if you had a free ticket to go any place in the United States anytime you wanted to, you probably would be going places for entertainment and that sort of thing. And that wasn't something they even thought about doing then. It was,
mm,
oh, well, yeah, we'll go see the family, and
yeah.
some people would do that here, but you know, I'd go to New York.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
I
It's
wouldn't just
changed. It's
go to
changed
Los
up.
Angeles.
Well, we have technology now, right?
Right.
Railroads shaped America in a different way. It was one of the biggest things that happened in
Mm-hmm.
this country was the
Mm-hmm.
railroads,
Yep.
and it changed lives, it changed industry. I mean, look how many towns. There's this tiny town in Nevada called Yerington, outside of Reno, and it's called Yerington after the name of some railroad inspector dude trying to get them to bring the railroad there, and he never did. Even when they named
Oh,
the town,
uh-huh.
they
It,
named their town 3 times,
uh-huh.
and then finally the third one was that. One
Uh-huh.
was Pies and Switch because they were known for selling basically fake moonshine whiskey. Pisen is the poison, and the switch because they would switch it up, and it would be like people would go there and get their glass of whiskey, and it was like tar and water and whatever, and they would just call it whiskey, and that's what that town was. And the green, I think it was Greenfield first, then Pies and Switch, then Yerington, and
Huh.
Yerington was to attract the railroad dude, and it's in their museum. They want the railroad man to come into
Sure.
Lyon County,
Yeah.
and the guy never did it.
I
The
had I
railroad,
had
everybody wanted a railroad.
I had a little connection on my dad's side as well, because I learned that this was long ago. I learned that one of the Allen uncles or brothers or ancestors or something created a coupling for railroad cars that is still used today, the Allen
Wow.
coupling or whatever it is. Yeah, so it's interesting that I had that railroad connection on both sides, and I know
Yeah.
that one of my many times great grandfathers on the Allen side did travel quite a bit by train and actually came out to I grew up in Yuba City north of Sacramento, and the town
Oh, yeah,
right
yeah.
across the river is Marysville, and
Mm.
and he actually came to Marysville to start a post office there in, I guess, in the 1800s. So I mean, it is amazing the things that the railroad created for the United States. I mean, you could move food for one thing, which meant that the food that was grown in the Midwest and
Hmm.
what later became Dust Bowl states, unfortunately, could be moved to either coast and to the north and the south, and that meant people could get food, and that's where the food came from for supplying World War I, and that affected farmer subsidies. The government gave farmer subsidies, and all these farmers took out loans on equipment and everything, and thought they were going to be growing a lot of grain and corn and all this stuff. But when the war ended, the government said, "Well, we don't need that food anymore." So the farmers were stuck with loans. They had mortgaged their property. You know, they had taken out loans on equipment and everything, and they still had to pay for those, and it made it really hard for them, and there was a surplus of food. Yeah,
Yeah.
so a lot of
Don't
that,
don't get me
and
started
they
on
couldn't
that.
have done
It's
that without the railroad. So
right, but that's the thing. It was this connectivity that made everything happen. The railroad history is I mean, it's America's huge part of American history, and even also was part of slavery and getting people out of slavery too. It was,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
if we go back
Yeah.
into that family history too, railroads changed everything for everyone. Sometimes good or bad. I mean, we've got Pullman National Historic Site, I think, National Historical Park or National Monument in Chicago. That's one of our newer national park units. So that's interesting because of the Pullman cars, and you were talking about that. It's whew.
Yeah.
Well, do you feel like you learned America's history by doing your genealogy?
To some extent, but I've always been interested in history. I mean, we had to take American history, US history, a whole year of it when I was in high school. I don't know if kids still have to do that. We had to take civics for maybe half a year or a year, I think a whole year. And then we had to take US history and world history. So it was always interesting to me. I can remember my US history teacher saying at one point when we started studying the Civil War, it was a big classroom. There was probably 100 kids in the class. He said, listen, I want you to know when we start studying the Civil War that this textbook was written by white people. And if you read Black people's history of the Civil War and slavery, you're going to get a different point of view. So just remember that when you're reading, that this is not the end all and be all. And it really opened my eyes because before that, I had thought textbooks are all facts. And from then on, all through college and ever since then, when I read, I'm thinking, okay, what's behind this? Who wrote it? What's their point of view? And it really made a difference for me. So I've
Oh,
always loved history. I always
yeah, that's it. I love that because again, there's more than one side to a story, just like we started talking about, right? There's always
Mhm.
more than one side. Thank you so much for joining us, Francine. Everyone, again, October 1st, the book is out. It's called A Wolf in the Family. That's such a good name, too, right?
Yeah.
Wolf.
Yeah.
That's just perfect. Everyone, you can go to Francine Falk, which is Falk-Allen, and that's Allen. So FrancineFalk-Allen.com. And again, the link is in episode notes, so check it out. Thank you so much, and happy publishing day when October 1st comes around.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's been really fun. I really
I
appreciate the
I could
opportunity.
go down millions of rabbit holes with you. Do you know that, right? It's like this is a dangerous topic, and if we want to do more on railroads, let's do it. But and others. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Stay in touch.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.